episode 355 of the Tennis Files podcast, you'll learn how to simplify your tennis game with Greg Moran. Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. This is Marabon, and I'm back with another interview. This one is with Coach Greg Moran. He is the author of The Truth About Tennis, the definitive guide for the recreational player. And that's what this podcast is all about, which is to help tennis players improve their tennis game, club level players like you and me. So in addition to writing this awesome book, Greg has also been coaching tennis for over 45 years, helping players of all ages and abilities improve their tennis, win more matches, and have a great time doing it, which is awesome. Greg is also a member of the Wilton advisory staff, the Cardio Tennis National Speakers Team, and the USTA's Coach Developer Program. Greg has also traveled the country and to Africa conducting workshops for players and coaches. Greg is also a frequent contributor to Tennis Magazine and is the author of the best-selling Tennis Beyond Big Shots book. And Greg was also the owner and director of tennis at the Four Seasons Racquet Club in Wilton, Connecticut. We have a Four Seasons Racquet Club in my area as well, I think in Virginia. But in any case, in this interview, talk about the three biggest things that recreational players need to work on to get to the next level, developing your personal program to improve, whether we should be emulating the pros or not, how we can use spin to level up our game, and also the pitfalls of concentrating too much on that as well. Some simple doubles and singles strategies to simplify and amplify our success, and much, much more. So I really hope that you enjoy my interview with Greg. And without further ado, here it is. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Tennis Files podcast. It's really an honor and a pleasure to have on Greg Moran on the show today. He is the author of The Truth About Tennis, the definitive guide for the recreational player. And what I love about having you on, Greg, is that, this podcast is all about how to help the recreational player, the club level player improve their game. So just a really fantastic resource for you to write a very comprehensive guide on that. And just tell us a bit about your background, Greg, because very impressive. I mean, I think this would be, this is tough for anybody. You've got over 4 decades of coaching tennis at this point?
Probably more than that. I'm 64 years old, and
Wow.
I grew up in a small town in Connecticut, and this was probably 1969-ish, and before the tennis boom. And my parents, we were fortunate to be members of one of the local clubs, and my parents wanted me to, they both played tennis, so they wanted me to take lessons. And you're too young to remember this, but it was, tennis was not cool back then. Right. It was not baseball, basketball, or football. So I really wasn't particularly into it. But then they finally convinced me to take a lesson with the club pro. And it was just to say life changing is very corny, but it was. The pro made it so much fun. It was a 30-minute lesson. And I begged for another one, and then another one. And then I became his ball boy. I was while you were taking a lesson with, his name was Rick, I would be on the court picking up balls during the lesson. And at the end of the day, he would hit with me as payment. He gave me a racket. And that started the fire. So that was, I was 9 or 10 years old. And as I said, I'm 64 now. So that was where it all began.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Greg, want to ask you, you mentioned it's, obviously like the part of the title of the book, the definitive guide for the recreational player. What in your mind makes this guide, this book, such a definitive guide?
Well, it's how much time do you have? Because this is
plenty.
This is something that I am passionate about. Maribon, a lot of tennis pros get into it because they want to raise the next, whatever, Roger Federer, Serena Williams, etc. That's never ever really interested me. I'm much more into the recreational player, which at the end of the day is what everybody wraps back around to. I've got a strong group of men that I work with on Saturday, and these guys are, 4 or 5-ish level. And I tell them, it doesn't matter how good any of us ever were, we all wrap back around to being recreational players at the end of the day. And, one of the very cool things for me is having been at the club I'm at for so long, I've seen kids that I started out at age 3, 4, and 5 are now in their 30s and 40s, and they're bringing their children to the club, which is great, the next generation. But the really great thing for me is that the parents are still playing. So people that we started when they were little are now in their 30s and 40s, still loving tennis, and they're going to play for the rest of their lives. And that's always been, as an instructor, that's always been my barometer. How can that not be success, right? If somebody plays tennis for 60 years. So I've always been much more interested in longevity as opposed to level. And what led me to write this book, I wrote 2 books previously and thought I was done. And then there's just so much tennis information out there now. When I started through the book, I did a Google search of tennis instruction, and it came up like 54 million sources. And what I see, the result of that when people come to me on the court, is I see a tremendous amount of confusion. I see a tremendous amount of what I feel is incorrect information, for the recreational player. And it's important to define what that is exactly. And what I see is a lot of people going down the wrong path, both in terms of how they swing the racket and their approach to strategy. And what ends up happening, in my opinion, is that wrong path, leads them to become frustrated and then ultimately perhaps get injured or fed up with tennis and go to pickleball or something like that. So that doesn't really go in with my theme of longevity. So I felt the need to write the book because I wanted to try to trim the fat a little bit and just get people kind of on the path of what I feel the most important things are. I have a thing, there are no secrets. You'll see this on the internet all the time, the 7 secrets to the serve. Here are the first 4, give me your credit card, I'll give you the final 3. And I hate that stuff. I don't think there are any secrets. I don't think there are any revolutionary approaches. I think they're facts and fundamentals, and I wanted to write the book to remind players of those.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, when you speak about longevity, it made me think about quite a few friends that I had in juniors that were great players, and now they've given up the sport, or, they're injured or something. It's definitely sad to see. So yeah, I mean, the main thing about it is just to enjoy the sport that you love for as long as possible. And yeah, definitely love that. And like you said, it's really all about, at the end of the day, the fundamentals, making sure you have them and analyzing. And then if you don't, working really hard to integrate them, because believe me, it's really difficult, especially the technical part of it. I guess a question for you, Greg, is what are the 3 biggest things in your mind that the recreational player needs to work on to get to the next level? If you had to pick your top 3.
My top 3, simplicity. Simplifying everything. That would be probably number 1, 2, and 3. I think tennis instructions become very complicated. Again, you may be too young, but I'm sure you may know this name, Vic Braden, right? Mm-hmm. Who is, in my opinion, the greatest tennis teacher of all time. And I had the opportunity to do a few things with him. And he said to me one time that the better a tennis player gets, the simpler their approach to the game has to become. And I put that out there every day. And the reason for that, I think, is pretty obvious, because what happens is you get better, the game gets much faster, right? So that's something that I really try to, I don't like to say preach, but I try to convey to the people I work with. And Maribel, when you're working with the recreational player as an instructor, it's really important to understand, why they're out there, and then tailor your sessions, accordingly. Like, for example, I've got a group of ladies that come every Monday from 11 to 12:30. They play once a week. They've taken lessons with me for probably 4 years. They have not gotten any better, right? Which is a little frustrating for me, but they just come to have fun, to run around. They don't know what USTA stands for, right? And they come, they play their tennis, and they have lunch. So the way I construct that lesson is it's fun. It's not heavy on instruction, because that's not what they're there for. But then contrast with the group that comes after them, serious, 4 or 5 USTA ladies. They've been to the finals, X number of years. They want to win it this year. They come to the court already warmed up. It's all business. So it's different type of atmosphere with the lessons. But as far as, what to teach the recreational player, I think the average recreational player will do much, much better with simplicity, both in terms of how their mechanics, moving the racket, and also in terms of their approach to strategy. My other 2 books were called, the first one was called Tennis Beyond Big Shots. And there was the title there was kind of came from that there's more to tennis than just coming to the court and firing away. And the second book was called Doubles Beyond Big Shots. And I had a copy of a chess set on there.
Mm.
And there was a very famous tennis journalist, Bud Collins, who I'm sure you've heard of, and he had a great line. He said, "Good tennis is like athletic chess." And that's kind of the way I feel tennis should be played. So yeah, as far as what I work with the recreational players on is simplicity with their strokes. I mean, obviously from a technical standpoint, most club players, in my opinion, the two most important elements of stroke production really are preparation, right? Preparing the racket is, whether you have a big loop, no loop, straight back, whatever, prepare the racket quickly. And then at that point, it becomes about creating space between you and the ball, and then stepping in and trying to have a long hitting zone. Those are the tips that I find help the recreational player, dramatically every day.
Yeah, great stuff. Great. So you mentioned obviously simplicity and mechanics and strategy. So what are maybe, one or two examples of the simplifying the mechanics? I mean, you talked about preparation. Does that mean that it's like, as short a backswing as possible, or how do you approach simplifying the mechanics?
Yeah, I've changed this approach a little bit. I think everything, and I've got these group of 4 or 5 level guys, and I'll pull them to the net, and I'll have one of the pros that's helping me, and I'll say to them, take a look at everybody, and tell me how long it takes before they start to roll their eyes when I start to talk about what I'm going to talk about. And when I talk about really a lot, and I think it's really, really underemphasized in the recreational world, is the ready position and the split step. And everybody, I used to do things with Tennis Magazine, and they would say, "Well, what do you want to write about?" "Well, I want to write about the split step." And then, no, 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 everybody knows that. Everybody knows that. Well, I mean, I know you're a very high level player, so of course it's innate to you. But if you walk into any tennis club in the country and you're watching even the 4 level players, 4 certainly 3-5 and 3 level, you've seen a sloppy ready position, and you've seen, little, if any split steps. And to me, that's really, if you're late right off the mark, then you're just playing catch up. So I emphasize with the very strong players, a very focused, ready position with the racket centered, et cetera, the split step. And then what's the first move after the split step? A shoulder turn. The unit turn is the high tech term everybody likes to use these days, right? But I like the shoulder turn, a full turn for ground strokes, less for volleys. And that's really gets into the whole simplicity thing. And I know I made this mistake for many years as a young pro that I didn't emphasize those two things, because it doesn't matter with a beginning player, right? You can have a sloppy ready position. You don't need to split step because the ball's not coming that fast and it's not coming that often. And then your lower level players get into very sloppy habits. And as they get better and the ball does begin to come back more often and is coming faster, they get hit with a real reality check that they've got sloppy technique, too much going on. And then, I read a great quote. Somebody said there's no right or wrong way to hold or swing the racket, but there's efficient and there's less efficient. And I think
Right.
certainly for nobody's teaching the Francis Tiafoe forehand, right? I'm not sure I'd call that efficient. It certainly works for him, right? But for
Yeah.
the club player that plays once a week or twice a week, probably not so much.
Yeah, definitely. TF, a local for our area, but yeah, definitely, bigger. Similar thought to like Medvedev or something. Like, obviously they make it work for them, but then you just, the timing is so much harder to execute among other things. So, great stuff. And, I noticed obviously that, the legend Rick Macy, who I've had the
Mm.
pleasure of interviewing a couple of times, like he wrote your foreword, which is really cool. So I was wondering, like, what your relationship with him. Obviously he coached so many great players, like the Williams sisters and Roddick and so forth.
Yeah, we just a little bit. I mean, I reached out to him because of who he is, and he was crazy because I'm up at 3 a.m. getting to the park and blah blah, all that stuff, and you kind of figure, yeah, right. And then I started getting 3 a.m. emails from him. So he's in that respect, he is the real deal. So yeah, no, so I reached out to him about, some questions about juniors. I think it says that in my book. And then he was nice enough to do the forward. And in fact, we have a very young junior player at my club who now is going to see him regularly. He's just, what I love about him, Maribon, in all honesty, is just his passion for it. He's off the charts with that. And as a guy similar to my age in his 60s to be that passionate and still on the court that much. That's kind of a big thing as you get, as tennis teachers get older. I get asked this question a lot now that I've gotten older, and I have to say it annoys me, is people will say, "Are you still teaching?" And it's like if you're a teaching pro, the goal should be to get off the court. And I said, well, no, of course I'm still teaching. That's why, I recently sold my club. And I sold my club because I want to do more tennis. I want to be on the court more. I want to write more. I'm a tennis pro at heart. So that's where I kind of, bond with Rick. I mean, as far as the WTA and the ATP forehand, I'll defer to him on that type of stuff. But I just love his passion, and he's a lifelong tennis guy.
Yeah, he certainly is. He certainly is. So, one thing that I think as, players, amateur players try to do is they try to emulate the pros. So I was wondering, what your thoughts are on that, whether they should do that, whether there's limits to doing that and so forth.
I think if you look at the book is called The Truth About Tennis, and the first three little mini sections are called Three Truths That You Must Accept. And truth number one is nothing will work if you don't, meaning if you don't practice, you're not going to get better. And I deal with that a lot with players, in the recreational world who are playing, once a week, twice a week, and they expect to be, to become great players. And I try to give them a real dose of reality. But also, if you're only playing once or twice a week, adjust your expectations. And that's one of the things I try to get people to understand. But truth number two is trying to play like the pros is ridiculous. And I believe that firmly. I think when you're seeing a professional, you're seeing, largely a finished product, right? Who spent hours, thousands of hours hitting millions and millions of tennis balls, to develop this, very, very special talent. And I think a lot, of course, you see your heroes on TV and you want to try to emulate them. And I often say the worst 2 weeks in the life of a teaching pro like me are the 2 weeks after a Grand Slam. Everybody knows I live very near the US Open. So people will go to the tournament, they'll come back. Oh, what'd you notice? Oh my God, they hit the ball so hard. Well, yeah, they hit the ball so hard, but that's not why they're great. So no, I'm very anti trying to play like the pros. That doesn't mean there aren't things you can't learn from them, right? Preparation. I think Venus and Serena with their how quickly they prepared their racket was phenomenal. Footwork. And I do think it's changed a little bit in recent years because I think the athlete has caught up to the technology. So it's not just how hard can you hit the ball. You're watching the rallies now. You're seeing more. You're seeing more slice backhands. You're seeing more drop shots. You're seeing more. I don't know if stylistic is the right word, but in the recreational world, there is the perception that bigger is better. And a lot of players have the disease of more. More topspin, more power, more angle. And in my opinion, that just leads to more errors, more injuries, more losses. So I'm kind of anti play like the pros and I always want to specify the recreational player.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely a fair view there. One thing that is really cool in the book is you have a section on designing your personal program for improvement. So I was wondering if you could kind of tell us more about that section and how it can help.
Yeah, that was a guy that came to me, and he was he was a club player. He played a couple times a week, but like so many club players, he plays, but he doesn't really practice. So he'll come out to the courts. They'll do that ridiculous mini tennis warm up that people do these days, which I'm sure you see, where the people stand around, they tap the ball back and forth, they don't move their feet, they catch up with their friends. How's the wife? How's the kids? They go back to the baseline, hit a couple of ground strokes. Stick their leg up on the net post and do a couple of pulsating movements to try to stretch. And then they say first one in and away they go, right? So they're certainly not warmed up. But he was this kind of guy. And he did that a couple times a week, but never really practiced his game. He played, but never practiced. So he got incredibly frustrated. And it got to the point where he came off, he was a big USTA player, nice 3-5 level player. But wasn't getting better, was losing to people he didn't feel he should lose to. And the frustration just, continued to build. So after another disappointing season, he threw his rackets in the garbage can, was frustrated, and that was it. And he made the decision, I'm either going to put some time into this or I'm just going to move on to something else. And he made the decision to put some time into it. So he came to me and, we started to do some lessons and we took a look at everything. We looked at his strokes. We looked at his fitness, his flexibility, his approach to strategy. And then we set some goals. We set some fitness goals. We set some mental game goals. We set some goals with his, to learn a better slice backhand, learn a kick serve. And it just was a very meticulous process that he wrote down, in his tennis journal. And he did a very smart thing. He said, I'm not going to play USTA during the summer season, which was great because, as you know, you're not, when you're trying to learn something new and then you get into a competitive situation, it's not going to be long before you go back to what you're comfortable with. Right.
Yeah.
So he removed all competition. which was great. That gave him kind of the
Smart.
freedom to learn and to fail. And he did a great job. And then he came back the next year, and he's had winning years since. His ratings bumped up to 4.0. And the message, there is if you put the time and make a plan, you'll get better.
Yeah. That's definitely wise words there. In terms of anticipation, that's one area that I get a ton of questions about. Like, how can I improve my anticipation, whether that's at the net or maybe it's just, in general, just like, where the shot may go. And I feel like I've improved on that over time just by playing and trying to pick up on cues. But what are, one or two tips that you have on anticipation?
Yeah, no, I've got it's funny because I just worked with a group of ladies yesterday and we talked exactly about this. So I kind of break it down to, I've hit a ball to you and I'm seeing you moving for the ball. I'm going to look for three things. Number one, I'm going to look for body language, right? What's your body language? Are you leaning back? Are you leaning forward? Are you moving left? Are you off balance? Are you balanced? And that's information, right? Number two is where are you in the court? Right. So if you're 15 feet behind the baseline and you're falling backwards, that's information. And number three is strike zone. What strike zone are you hitting the ball in? Now, a lot of pros have, a lot of strike zones. I saw somebody has 6 different strike zones. I think for the club player, that's probably, a few too many. So I really break it down to 3, court to knees, knees to chest, and above the chest would be strike zone number 3. So if I'm seeing a player, 12 feet behind the baseline with their left leg up around their shoulder, right, falling backwards, to me, that means they're going to lob. And if they've had any lessons from me, they're going to lob that shot. So I react accordingly. If they're moving forward, right, their body language is coming forward and the ball's in strike zone 2, that's a pretty good chance they're going to drive it, hit an aggressive shot. And then that's information. And I think, what I tell my players, Maribon, is anticipation is not really knowing exactly where the ball is going to go, but it's narrowing it down to the most likely shots. And I coach a lot of doubles players, and I'm very big on, one of the things I say is, we're going to work on playing the game the way the game is played at the level we want to get to. So a lot of players in the club world, if they can get to be a 4.0 level player, that's a great accomplishment. So I've got a lot of the people I work with, the ladies in particular, forcing them to come to the net. 2 players up, we all know that's the highest, best chance to win if you have the skills. And once they get to the net, the biggest fear is what? Wow, the ball's going to get hit over my head. I come to the net, they lob over my head. Greg told me to come in. He doesn't know what he's talking about. What do I do? So that's where the anticipation comes in big time. When I have them at the net, it's really, to me, the most important thing I want them to figure out or try to figure out is the other player going to lob the ball or drive the ball? But I think those 3 things, regardless of singles, doubles, level, will certainly help to get a feel of what's coming next.
Yeah, that's really good advice. So, Greg, one section that I love in your book is about spin. I love playing with spin. I had a ton of top spin, and I've really been able to use it to my advantage. So I wanted to ask you, how club level players can use spin to help them be more successful in their matches?
Yeah, I think there's a real, misconception about. I think there's a spin epidemic in the world of recreational players, and I think, and again, I'm not talking about your level. I know you're 4.5 level player, right? Very strong. Yeah, so you're a bit of an outlier. So I'm not, what you're able to do physically, athletically, is well above, what the masses are doing. And, how do you define a recreational player, right? A recreational player, the people that I see, for the most part in the adult category are your, 25, 30, even a little bit older than that, middle-aged adults who are, were great athletes, weren't great athletes, are in great, a lot of them aren't in great shape. And they're playing, as I said, recreationally. So you have to take that into account. And what happens with those players is they come out and they're watching the pros and what they see on TV, the way they feel topspin is achieved. You've heard that phrase, come over the ball. We've all heard that. Well, that makes no sense to me because if you come over the ball, what's the ball going to do? Come up through the strings to go over the net? There's no such thing as coming over the ball. Right. And one thing I tell my players a lot is, when you watch the pros, it looks like, I don't know if you can see my hand, it looks like when the pros hit, they're very, quickly, quote unquote, coming over the ball. But if you see slowed down film, and I've seen it, the pros, Roger Federer's forehand extends out 4 more feet after he makes contact before his elbow breaks. And you don't see that on TV because it's too fast. right? And so I think a lot of players that they what's the word I'm looking for? They mistake the finish for the follow through, right? So what I really stress with my people is that long hitting zone, right? I was taught years ago, point to your target, okay, which is great, point you, and then your racket can slowly finish over. But I hear tips from pros like, point your elbow to your target or read your wristband. And I've yet to figure out what that has to do with anything, because by the time that happens, by the time I'm reading my wristband, the ball's long gone. Right. So that has no, that can't, it's not that it's not important, but it's certainly not a focal point, in my opinion. So I'm very big with players, it's a circular, the ground strokes are circular motions, top spins coming from the legs, not a tremendous wrist roll. And that's, I think, why so many, tennis players in the recreational world have injuries. I think that the spin is great, but of course, obviously spin is great, but I think it's overemphasized for the average club player. One of the things I make all my, my players do when I battle with the guys, the stronger guys, is I make them all, slice their backhand. Make them all learn to slice their back, particularly the one-handed backhand guys, right? The two-hand is different. I feel they need to add that shot for sure. But I've got a lot of guys in their 50s, even a little bit older, that'll come and they're trying to hit their Stan Wawrinka, or Roger Federer one-handed backhand. And the 1 out of 15 they actually connect with, is nice, but it's not a great shot. And to me, it's all built around consistency. And I tell these guys, when the ball comes to hit a topspin one-handed backhand, you've got to be perfectly positioned, right? And how often does that happen in reality? With a slice backhand, you can hit a good slice backhand if the ball's too high, if it's too low, if it's out wide. So I make them learn that shot, big time. And then we work on the topspin just because that makes them feel, like they're good players. So spin obviously is, of course it's important, but I think it's a little excessive in the recreational world as far as the topspin goes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, great points again. You do see a lot of players that they're trying to put all this topspin and their ball is like barely even reaching the net sometimes because they're just really not giving that, forward, forward enough swing there, that part of it. And, it's interesting too, because I on my backhand, actually it was hurting me a bit to really try to hit with so much topspin on it. And once I started extending more, and actually there was a tip that I remember and say sometimes, which is kind of, imagine that you're trying to hit through multiple balls, like 3 balls or something. That one really helps extend.
That's an old tip. That's a great tip. And again, point your racket out to your target and then you can finish. No, that's all wonderful stuff. Yeah. But that goes back to, that's not new information, and that goes back to why I wrote the book. There's so much out there now that I think just confuses players. And it's an interesting thing. Remember, I heard a great quote, I'm big on fundamentals, right? And, we had a group of ladies come out and they came up to me and said, "Oh, Greg, you're going to teach us all kinds of new stuff." And I said, "No." I said, "We're going to work on, fundamentals." And I saw they started talking to each other, whispering to each other, "Oh God, this is going to be horrible. We're going to work on, blah, blah, blah." So I pulled them all in and I said, "Look, ladies, let's do what we're going to do." I said, "If anybody's unhappy at the end of the 2 hours, I'll be happy to give you a refund." And of course, at the end of the 2 hours, we got them hitting the ball better. And all they could say, "Well, when are we going to do this again?"
Nice.
Right? Another interesting thing I heard was, Tom Brady at age 45 was doing the same fundamental footwork drills he was doing at age 9.
Wow.
Yeah, even for really good players. Yeah.
Love that. Love that. So we talked about spin, Greg. How about power? Like what, how much a role, if any, does that play into our games? And what do you think about that subject?
Well, I said this again to somebody today on the court this morning, teaching tennis as long as I have never said to a player, "Today we're going to work on power." I don't believe you work on power. I believe power, evolves as technique improves. I think, one of the worst phrases, and again, I want to differentiate, make sure that I'm talking, we're talking recreational world, the players that are, as I said before, the once a weekers, the twice a weekers. I think power is, it evolves as technique improves. I think for the club player, one of the worst phrases ever invented was racket head speed. Right. You and I know, everybody, and I'm sure listening to you knows what racket head speed is, but you say that to a lot of players, you need more racket head speed. Well, what do? They're going to come out, they're going to swing their arm harder. Their muscles are going to tense up. When their muscles tense up, the stroke becomes shorter. They're not going to hit through, et cetera, et cetera. So no, I don't, I've never said to a player today, we're going to work on power. And it's interesting because, every now and then when the stars align and the fundamentals line up and the ball explodes off their racket, they get that look on their face. And yes, it's because your technique was, anybody can hit the ball hard. There's no skill in that. The skill is being able to consistently, keep the ball in play, and the power will come.
Yeah, definitely, Greg. So you do have a really cool bonus section on doubles. What are maybe one or two tweaks to our doubles game that we can make to play high percentage tennis? I think the majority of the players listening and watching are probably playing doubles. I'm playing majority doubles in my USTA league. So that would be a very helpful for us to learn from you about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Down the middle, at the feet, and over the head. Remember that. That's where most points are won in high level doubles. And it's not a battle, but you'll see at the lower levels, a lot of points are won with alleys and angles. And I always talk about the little old men and ladies down in Florida, who they kind of, they trot over and they hit a sharp angle this way or down the alley that way. And I say that tends to work, that or lower level players, because they have so much time to hit the ball. And that goes back to before, the simplicity. Once you get to a better level of tennis, the pace is quicker, right? So the majority of shots, points are won hitting down the middle, hitting at the opponent's feet, and pushing them back with lobs. And I think a great phrase that I wish I'd made up, which I didn't, is don't try to hit shots your opponent can't touch, hit shots they can't return. I think that's a real good phrase, because I think so many errors, come from what's one of the first phrases we were taught regarding strategy, hit them where they not, hit them where they ain't. And somebody will make an error. And what were you doing there? I was trying to keep it away from them. I think that really goes away as you get to a better level of tennis, because the better players are going to position themselves, properly. So the only, quote unquote, open space is the most difficult place to hit. So that gets back to down the middle, at the feet, over the head. And one that I'm very big on, and I tell my players, put this on my tennis tombstone: when you're in trouble, hit up, meaning get the ball, lob it up, get the ball back. And I think, Maribon, it also depends on the level of the players, right? Like if I've got a group of 4 or 5 level men, right, we're getting them, come to the net, and we work on the net skills, all that kind of stuff. Today I was working with a group of 3-0 level ladies. And it's the same thing. We're trying to get them to the next level. So during their sessions, we're having them come to the net. That's how the game should be played, at the better level, 2 players up. But I said to them, you have a match tomorrow. The net skills, 2 players at the net probably isn't going to be great. So you'll be more successful tomorrow, 1 up, 1 back. But long-term development is, 2 players up. So, doubles tips for players as they get better, learn to play the net, learn to anticipate lobs. And remember that most points are won hitting down the middle, at the feet, and over the head.
Yeah, I love that. Down the middle, that's my favorite shot in doubles. Just, it's high percentage and that's lower. And then also you have like 2 players now who a lot of times are not sure, like, oh, who should go for this? So it's really excellent. And I go down the middle and also like to dip as well. So it's like almost at the feet, but not quite. But yeah, and then also I love volleying at the feet, obviously not going for people's heads or anything like that, but at their feet, it's extremely difficult for them to hit a reflex volley back. And also, just dipping at their feet as well. If I don't go down the middle, lobs, I love using to neutralize. Even, a lot of times when I get a hard serve down the tee, when I'm on the deuce side, it's like I'm doing, backhand lob over the net player's backhand side if I can, but usually that just neutralizes everything. Really.
But I think it's important also, to emphasize, with the players that, any strategy is only as good as the execution, right? Yeah. So I can say hit down the middle, but if you hit down the middle and it's 4 feet over the net, that's not going to be good, right? So one of the things I'll do with my players is they're playing, we'll walk around and they'll lose a point, and I'll say, bad strategy or bad execution. Right, because I want them to understand that they're doing the right thing, but they're not doing it well enough yet.
Right.
And conversely, you can say, one of the things I hear all the time are people will come to me after their match and they'll say, oh my God, Maribon did this and he angled it off here and he hit down my alley and he did. It's always, they did this, he did that. And I say, well, what are you doing that's allowing them to do that? Right? Maribon hits
Right.
down my alley every time. Well, are you shifting over to cover your alley like you should? He's getting to the
Right.
net all the time. Well, are you keeping your balls deep so he can't get in? He's ripping his forehand behind you all the time. Well, are you giving him balls in his comfortable strike? You know what I mean? So it's more, I like players to kind of think of, it's like they're absolving themselves of any responsibility when they say they're doing this, they're doing that. The opponent can only do what we allow them to do.
Right. 100%. 100%. Great stuff there, Greg. And then, shifting to singles, just so we have, balance with the suggestions here. What's maybe one big singles strategy or concept that you think we can tweak and then get some really good results from?
Again, percentage tennis, the majority of ground strokes should be hit cross court and deep. Approach straight ahead or approach down the line. I do think what a lot of players are missing, one of the things I say to differentiate the two singles and doubles is the quality of your shot in doubles is determined by the height of the ball, right? So you want to be hitting very low or very, very high. In singles, the quality of your shot is determined by the depth of your ball. Right. There's that old saying, the point doesn't begin until somebody hits a short ball. And I think I know a lot of club players, they love to hit those line drives, 3 inches over the net that land 2 feet behind the service line. And something I read a while back, I saw in one of the tennis magazines, Nadal's average ground stroke clears the net by 90 inches.
Wow.
And Federer and Djokovic are like in the 70s and 60s. Point being, height will give you depth. And if you're playing singles, to hit the ball high, there's nobody. One of the things I'll do is I'll put a player back at the baseline and I'll feed them 2 balls. And I'll say, tell me which one of these you feel is more comfortable to hit. And I'll feed one right to their comfortable strike zone. And then I'll put one 8 feet above their head. And I say, well, of course, that one's uncomfortable. Well, then when you're playing your games, why are you trying to hit these, lower balls that are getting right into comfortable strike zones? There's no player that I am ever going to be on the court with that when they're 8 feet behind the baseline and the ball's, 6 feet above their head is going to be saying, oh, good, I can't wait to hit this shot. So for the club player, every player, singles, it's depth.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Great stuff. So, I mean, there's obviously many facets of the game. When I have my tennis summit every year, I've got, sessions on mental game, strategy, technique, fitness, and there's equipment too. But which one of these areas that many of you cover in your book, what do you think is the most either important or maybe the one that players need to work on the most, generally speaking, to get the most results on?
Preparation.
Preparation.
I think most players, in the recreational world, prepare poorly, right? As I said before, the ready position is one thing. The split step is massive, right? Your average club player, I heard another great quote. It said, if the ball's bounced on your side of the court, right, and your racket's not prepared, the ball's in control of the shot. If the ball's bounced on the side of the court and you're in control of the shot. And I think what happens a lot is players, prepare, incredibly late. They don't split step, so they're late right off the bat moving. They're moving, their racket's not being prepared. Then they kind of arrive at the ball late, and it's become a mad dash to try to speed up, to catch up. And I call it Cirque du Soleil tennis, right? The legs are going one way, the arms are going the other way, and then it just becomes panic. So the tips that I find that help people improve the most, prepare the racket as quickly as you possibly can, and then create space. That's a big one. Create space so that you can then move forward into the shot, and then that'll allow you to have that longer hitting zone that's so important.
Good stuff. So another huge area that players are asking coaches all the time about, including myself, are how to deal with choking. Players inevitably get nervous during big moments, critical times. Maybe they're at a close out a match and they think about how great it would be to win, and then boom, of course they, choke. So what's some advice you can give us on that front?
That's a good question, because I would say nobody in the history of junior tennis got more nervous than me. Nervous, throw up. It's a challenging thing. Why do you choke? We choke because we're afraid, right? We're afraid of of losing. Sometimes if we've won a match, we're afraid of winning. God forbid we win, because then other people are going to expect me to win. I mean, what helped me a lot is I learned there was a very famous, I guess, sports psychologist, one of the first ones. His name was Jim Lair, and he wrote some great books. And years ago, I think it was called The Mental Game. And it was just something that he said about just kind of, love the challenge, so to speak, appreciate, like Billie Jean King's book, Pressure is a Privilege. Right. And you think about sports psychology, I'm sure Jeff Greenwald, who wrote the great book, Fearless Tennis, I think it is, or The Best Tennis of Your Life. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And he's a good friend of mine. He grew up actually in my area. And
nice.
Sports psychology, you have to kind of, train your brain, trick your brain. Pressure is a privilege. You're happy to be there. Something that helped me a lot was when I would play and become very, very nervous. For example, let's say you hit a shot and come to the net. I would say, oh my God, here comes Maribon. I got to hit it past him. And somebody said to me, forget about the player, pick your targets. Pick a target. So you would come to the net and I wouldn't be thinking about you. I would pick a target on the court and I would aim for the target, and taking you out of the equation, helped me quite a bit. That's one thing. Obviously try to practice from different situations. It's very tough in practice. You get that choking feeling. It's that feeling in your stomach, right? And as a tennis teacher, I try to recreate that feeling, during lessons, but it's hard to do. And there are all kinds of, little tricks. You give a player one serve, you start at different scores. I think really the best way to do it is you just have to put yourself in the situation over and over and over. And then for the club player, as you do get a little older, and this happened to me, you gain a little bit of perspective too. It is just tennis, right? It's okay to, and then once you lessen the importance of it in your mind, yes, of course you want to play well, you want to win, you want to, get better, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it is just tennis. It is a tennis game. The sun's going to come up, tomorrow's another day, et cetera, et cetera. So I think lessening the importance of it in the overall scheme might help some people. That's a tough one. I struggled with that, for many, many years.
Yeah, it's tough. A lot of good strategies to be implemented there, but definitely, I find that the in between point routine helps a lot for that stuff. Let's see. So, one really cool section too that I saw in your book was regarding trying to get the most out of a coach that you hire. So obviously there's a lot of us who are like looking for good coaches or maybe have a coach, but wonder how do we maximize, especially, these days, sometimes lessons can be expensive. So what do you think we should be doing to try to get the most out of our private lessons?
I think you should choose wisely first, and I think you should stay with that coach for an extended period of time. That's something that's really changed, over the past, however many years. Years ago, you had your pro and you stuck with your pro for X number of years and you progressed, you had fun, you had a relationship, and you got better. Today, people take lessons from so many different pros. I was having a conversation the other day with a lady who takes lessons from probably 3 or 4 different people. And she said to me, well, I think it's good because different pros, see different things. And I said to her, well, in my opinion, our tennis games are not a scientific experiment where we need to put together a think tank, to try to figure it all out. Strokes are strokes, fundamentals are fundamentals. And what happens when you're going with a lot of different pros is everybody has different priorities. As we said earlier, to me, the preparation, the footwork, getting the racket ready is huge. Other pros may emphasize, a more aggressive approach, but whatever. And then what ends up happening is if you have a lesson with me on Monday, somebody else on Wednesday, and somebody else on Friday, you could work on 3 or 4 entirely different things. And, we all prioritize what we think is important. So what happens is you end up working on a little bit of a few things and really, have very little deep learning. So I think number one is make sure that you choose wisely. Pick a pro and stick with the pro. I think you need to give a pro at least a year, to stay with him and see if what he's telling you and helping you with is a good mix for you. And then after that, I think take your lesson seriously. I think a lot of times people will come to the court and I'll say to them, what would you like to work on? And it's all, a little bit of everything, and that's, again, you're working on a little bit of everything, but perhaps, not enough of anything. So the lady I was talking to last week, when she said, we were talking about the different pros, and she said, so I should really just, pick one or two, 2 or 3 things to work on. And I said, no, pick one. So when you come to the lesson with me next week, you're going to do our doubles. Going to pick one thing, and it could be whatever. I'm going to split step every single time. I'm going to prepare my racket as quickly as I can. I'm going to make sure I lob when I'm in trouble. I'm going to hit, a percentage down the middle, and then focus, deeply. There's a great book, Maribon. It's called Mastery, and it talks about, how you truly learn. And it's really a good book because it explains the process, but it also begins with tennis. The first 5 or 6 pages, he talks about the learning process of tennis and how slow and tedious it can be. So it's a great. I would suggest that to your listeners to pick that up, because it really will help them understand the learning process. Because I think one of the reasons people kind of jump around between pros is they get frustrated. I've been playing with such and such for 3 weeks, and I'm not 2 levels better now. I'm going to try, somebody else. Maybe he's got another secret, or maybe he's got a different approach. And I, strongly say in the book, there are no secrets, there are no revolutionary approaches. And if you want to get better, you need to just put the time in and commit to an approach. I would say that.
Yeah, great stuff there. One other really cool element that I think I'm trying to remember who I was chatting with about it during the summit was about. Oh no, it was about with Jorge. Oh yeah, our mutual friend, and he was talking about sabotaging your opponent. So really important, fun, concept, and really helpful concept. So can you talk to us about what you mean by sabotage? Obviously, I don't think we mean putting something funny in their drink or anything like that. But what does it mean to sabotage your opponent, and what's your favorite way to do that?
Well, no, I love that. And I learned a lot from that, from Jorge. So he's got a lot of great stuff on that. So I told a story in my book when I was in college, and I was playing a match, and I was getting killed. And the coach came around, and he said, well, what do you think you have to do? And I said, well, I have to play better. I have to hit harder. I have to go for more shots. I need to be more aggressive. I have to play better. And he looked at me and he said, well, Greg, you're not capable of playing any better. This is what you got. You're playing as well as you can. And he walked away. And I said, well, great. That's a lot of help, right? So what do I do now? So I went out there and I tried to play harder. I tried to hit harder. I tried to be more aggressive. I tried to hit more winners. And I was off the court in about 15 minutes. So I think a lot of players, when they're playing a match and they're losing, their approach is, I have to play better. And it's not like, one of the things Jorge says that I frequently quote, it's not like you enter a match and say, I'm going to play 70% of my best. And if Maribon wins the first set, I'm going to raise my game. I don't think it works like that. Everybody's out there playing their best right off the bat. So if I'm doing the best, if I'm playing my best and I'm losing, instead of trying to raise my game, which I probably can't, how about I try to lower your game? Bring your game down a little bit, right? And what are some ways to do that? Lots of different things. I mean, moon balls is a big one, right? Hit a lot of high, deep shots, lengthen the points, drop shots, slices, just anything to try to take the player out of the rhythm. But I think that's a totally different way to approach it. We're so apt to, I need to play better. Well, that's, maybe that's not going to happen today. So how do I make you play worse?
Yeah. Great stuff. Greg, curious about, obviously, we've talked about so many great concepts from your book, The Truth About Tennis, the definitive guide for the recreational player. And I am including a link in the show notes page, so definitely check that out to get Greg's book. But is there anywhere in particular that you want people to check out to, follow you, and or the book, or any, social profiles or anything like that you want to shout out?
No, not really. Amazon's great. And Maribon, what I'd like to do, because I do want to get the book out there, if some of your listeners would like to contact me, the first 10 that contact me, I'll be happy to send them a complimentary copy.
Oh, that's super nice of you. I appreciate that. That's great. And is there a way you wanted them to try to contact you?
Yeah, they can send me an email. My email is GMORAN at the number 4 seasonstennis.com.
Got it. Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That was definitely not even planned. So that was very nice of you, Greg. Appreciate that.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So I will, list that email address there below as well. and just writing a note for myself to do this. But yeah, awesome, Greg. And after people having listened to this interview and hopefully reading the book by now, what would you recommend they do as like to take the next step to really improve in their tennis game?
What would I recommend to take the next step? I think take a little, do a little what's the word I'm looking for? Self inventory. How much tennis am I going to be able to play? Right. If I'm going to play once a week, I need to understand that some days are going to be great. Other days, are going to be not so great. And just, it is what it is. I think if players can commit to twice a week, that really tends to be when I see people improve the most. Once they can get out there that second day a week. And obviously 3 is better. So I think really it's about just understanding what part tennis takes in your life. Do I want to make a serious commitment to it? Am I just going to play for fun? I had a lady in a clinic years ago, and one of the things I like to say is as I said earlier, I try to coach people to play at the level we want to get to. So this one particular lady was hitting all kinds of funky shots that were winning the points. And I said to her, her name was Megan, I said, Megan, that's a great shot, but at the next level, you'll need to, et cetera, et cetera. So I said that 2 or 3 times. And then she turned and looked at me and she said, well, Greg, what's wrong with this level? And it was not a thing, absolutely not a thing. So I think it's really important for people to just, take a good look and how much, what part do you want tennis to play in your life? If you're going to play a lot, great. Then you go after it. You commit, you get a pro, you do your thing. But if it's just once a week, then there's nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah, 100%, Greg. And is there anything else, that, you may want to, mention that maybe, I'd missed in asking you that, before we close it, you just want to shout out?
No, I just want to thank you for letting me do this. I think, everything you're doing is fantastic. I think your tennis summit is incredible. So maybe you'll let me come to that one year. That would be great. And
awesome.
I can't thank you enough.
Awesome, Greg. Well, I really want to thank you as well so much for coming on to the podcast. And as I mentioned, Greg's book, The Truth About Tennis, The Definitive Guide for the Recreational Player, is out now. And we'll have an Amazon link, right in the show notes page. So you can just go to information below this episode and click the link and check out the book. And as Greg mentioned, the first 10 to contact Greg will get a free copy. Got Greg's email in the show notes as well. So, Greg, thanks so much for coming on and hope to connect again soon. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. All right. I really hope that you enjoyed my interview with Greg. Big shout out to Greg for coming on to the show. And definitely, I highly encourage you to check out his book entitled The Truth About Tennis, The Definitive Guide for the Recreational Player. And you can check the show notes for that link. And also, as we mentioned, the first 10 people that contact Greg through his email will get a free copy of his book, which is pretty awesome. And you can email him at gmoran@fourseasonstennis.com. And again, his email is also in the show notes. Also, would really appreciate it if you would leave a review for the podcast. And you can do that in your favorite podcast app of choice that you use to listen to the show. We just find that Apple Podcasts is the biggest mover for the show. So if you can do it there, that'd be great. But any platform is much appreciated. Also, just want to leave you with a quote, as I often do at the end of each show. This one is by Peggy Noonan, and Peggy said, "Part of courage is simple consistency." And that's the theme of this episode today as well. Simplicity and also consistency is super important. So really appreciate you listening. Hope you enjoyed this one and got value from it, and looking forward to providing you with more content to help you improve your tennis game. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Tennis Files podcast. This is your host, Mirabana Ranchad, signing out.